Welcome to Conscious Quest, the LA-based podcast where we aim to stay conscious about everything current. Hello, welcome back, everyone. You are listening to Conscious Quest, the podcast for seekers. I am Sarah Parlow, one of your hosts, and I'm going to start today off with a question. Are you living the life that you want or the life that you are programmed to have? Today's topic, we are going to talk about something called the subconscious mind and how it affects our lives and how we can shift it in order for it to work for us. This is where my guest today comes in. I'm so excited about this episode. I have been waiting for this for a long time. It can really impact people in a very powerful way. Our guest today is Penny Chiasson. And to give you a little background about her, she is an award-winning, board-certified hypnotist, nurse anesthetist, #1 international best-selling author, and the host of the Penny on Your Thoughts podcast. She is a certified professional hypnosis instructor and contributes to 2 industry journals and sits on the advisory board of the International Association of Hypnosis Professionals. She is highly trusted in the transformational space and has worked with leading coaches, influencers, CEOs, and business leaders in 23 countries and on 6 continents. Please welcome to the show, Penny Chiasson. Hi, Penny.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I just love the whole vibe, Conscious Quest, because working with our subconscious is a part of that quest to tapping into our consciousness. So
And you
excited
have,
to be here.
thank you. And you've been working in that space for a few years now. 2019, was that when you kind of came on the scene?
That's when I made my pivot
Okay.
into the transformational space. I've been a hypnotist since 2013.
Okay.
And that's when the door got open to me as to what was possible. But it was my own journey that I started in 2018 that led to the pivot in 2019. And the rest, as they say, is history.
And just to give everyone listening some background, for what, 25 years before that, you were in the same industry as me. You were a nurse anesthetist.
Yes, 10 years as an ICU nurse and 15 as a nurse anesthetist. Absolutely.
And it's so wild because here we are, both are with this sort of very medical background exploring consciousness in the transformational space. Now, what led to this natural progression for you? Well, tell us about that choice to leave medicine and find something else.
Well, it was quite accidental.
Mm,
When I first learned about hypnosis, it was in preparation for creating a continuing education course
mhm,
for nurses to help them to better manage pain
mm,
because there were starting to be adverse effects with OxyContin coming on the scene and all of these things. People were having difficulty managing pain. And when I looked at the complementary modalities,
mhm.
I discovered the medical research on hypnosis, and something resonated about that. And I'm sure it was my soul, right? It was my intuition. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, and it nagged at me. And 4 years later, I found a training put together by a retired nurse anesthetist. I'm like, okay, I can actually get into what's really going on in the mind and not from a woo-woo perspective. Now I'm totally woo, but back then I was just kind of like new age. I don't know about this stuff.
Little woo.
A little woo. And I took that training out of curiosity. And when I left that training, my whole world had been turned on its head as to the power of the mind. So it was one of these things that I just kept feeling this pull. And I began to notice there was a misalignment of values.
Mm.
Medicine was starting, not medicine, the healthcare system
Yeah,
was moving away from patient-centered care.
yeah,
It was, in my opinion, moving away from healthcare to symptom management and sick care.
yeah.
And I couldn't really fully articulate what was happening. I just knew I was intensely dissatisfied
Yeah.
because I knew there was so much more available. And after I moved from Connecticut to Mississippi
Hmm.
in 2015, I took a pause from doing sessions with people and not being tapped into that thing that I was most aligned with, which was
Yeah.
helping people with their mind. It created a lot of turmoil in my life. And again, at that time, I couldn't articulate it. I just felt this I have to get out. I have to get out. I have to get out.
Wow.
And then when I started my transformational journey and coaching, I realized there's this whole other world. And that's when I learned about values and alignment. And that was what was causing my, coupled with being a woman with hormones and going through menopause and everything on its head, I was dealing with this huge misalignment. And I was understanding that when we're not in alignment with our soul's purpose, it creates this internal stress and friction. And that was when I knew that for truly my mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health, I had to find a way to allow this to happen and unfold so I could leave healthcare. So it was a selfish decision, but in a good way.
Yeah, and look at how many people have benefited from this as a result of you truly going into your intuition and listening to your soul's calling. And it is a very vulnerable and at times scary journey because it's less known. And I could certainly speak as someone working in medicine. The pull and the attraction of it is the stability, and it's hard to match that. And especially working as a nurse anesthetist, we're paid pretty well for what we do. So to step away from that as an entrepreneur, what an incredible journey to go on. So, just for full disclosure to all of our listeners, the reason I connected with Penny is we both have some history working with Jim Fortin in his transformational coaching program. And his program readily refers Penny for her hypnosis skills because you talked about a lot about values and sometimes, getting into better alignment with those values. Can we talk a little bit about the subconscious mind and how it can sometimes stand in the way of us getting what we want in life?
Absolutely. So from the time we're born, we're imprinted. We're imprinted from the time we're given a name. And we're imprinted in the way that life works or our model of reality by the way our family functions, our school functions, if we go to church, religion, those things begin to imprint. And we can pick up little things along the way that become part of our values and
Mhm.
part of our identity that we may or may not even remember when we get older. It's our subconscious values, the top 3 to 5. You can go Google it. It's amazing, the papers and everything that have been written on it. Our top 3 to 5 subconscious values drive all of our decisions.
Whew. Wow.
So when we think we're consciously making a decision, our subconscious is actually deciding first. So if we're given a set of 2 choices, I believe it's the Max Planck Institute did a study. And when someone was given a set of 2 choices, I believe they put them in a functional MRI. They
Okay.
showed them 2 images and they gave them a clicker and they could pick image A or B. And what they found was that the subconscious mind comes to the conclusion 7 seconds before we make the actual conscious decision.
Isn't that mind blowing?
Yeah, and a great example is when someone asks you, "Would you like to go out to dinner?" And you say, "Yes." And they're like, "Well, where would you wanna go?" And, sometimes you know right away, and sometimes you ponder it. And when you're pondering, your subconscious mind is really like, how do I feel? How do I want to feel? What's the experience I want to have today? And that's how we come to that decision. But what will happen is so not only do we have the values, we have the story around the values. So, for example, in my family,
Mm.
family is a big value. But the story that I have around what it means to support and be available to my family looks very different from some of my other family members. For some people, there's a little bit of codependency involved. And maybe it's because I'm adopted and I don't carry the genetic memory, the ancestral memory of that, because they are finding that we carry ancestral memories in the methylation molecules of our DNA. But it's been different for me. And so that causes a disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
It can cause friction because those stories are part of our beliefs.
Right.
Now, considering the audience that you have, let's, if I may, can I go into beliefs just a little bit?
I would love that, please.
Okay. In my experience doing thousands of sessions with clients and having had the benefit, like you mentioned, we met in a coaching space together, watching people go out and live their life after having experienced these sessions and being able to be a fly on the wall, so to speak. Not that I was spying on people, but just I love to observe people. We have an hierarchy of beliefs, and some beliefs are easily shifted and moved, and others are much more difficult. And the degree of difficulty, in my experience, and this is my opinion, my experience, full disclosure, I am not clinically trained in mental health, is the degree to which it is tied to the protective mechanism and our drive to maintain a sense of safety and security. And some people may think that that has to do with, that's like, oh, you're talking about trauma responses. Yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
We can have an emotional experience over something that's relatively innocuous, especially as a child. And because we don't have the context of life, the intensity of that emotion registers as, I need to avoid this, or I need to do something to keep it from happening again because I didn't do something right. Something was wrong here. And it can be something as simple as building a tower out of blocks. And when you showed mom's like, oh, that's great. But then mom says, let's do it like this, because maybe mom was feeling creative and she wanted to build her own tower. So she starts taking your tower down. And so there's confusion. You said you like it, but you're taking it apart. There must be something wrong with it. And that is an actual belief that I had that was keeping a very successful and well recognized client from transitioning in her career. It was the baseline. I shouldn't say it was the cause. There were other things.
Yeah.
But when we got to the root of the belief, so we could knock it down so she could build new beliefs and move on, that was it. And it's because it was intensely emotional.
Right. And it was also interpretation at the time. Again, as a child,
Yes.
before, they say the age of 7 is when your sort of frontal cortex comes online where you can critically think about, okay, am I looking at this the right way? But look, I mean, that was laid down, how many decades prior, and it was still interfering with your client's success. So, in other words, that programming, if it's in conflict with what we're trying to do consciously, we won't be able to do what we want consciously. Is that the point you're kind of getting
Correct.
to?
It will
Yeah.
run interference, and we
Mhm.
don't realize it's running interference until something happens that it's creating enough frustration and pain in our life that we look at it and say, what is going on here?
Yeah. Um, and so knowing this is so powerful, first of all, that there are these sort of things running underneath the surface. So then I guess the question is, what do we do about it? Because the subconscious mind doesn't work on the same principles as the conscious mind, correct?
Correct. And it's a multi-prong approach.
Hmm.
The first and most important is the way that we talk to ourselves. So
Mm.
this is a way that we can consciously begin to take control of the programming. There's something called the reticular activating system, and it acts to create the filter through which our subconscious processes the information we take in. If you've ever seen a news story and you are able to watch it objectively, and you're looking critically at the information, and you notice there's one group of people over here
Mhm.
that's interpreting it at this extreme, and there's another group of people over here interpreting it at that extreme, and you're like, it doesn't say either one of those things. It's one because of their beliefs,
Okay.
but it's also because of their reticular activating system. The stories they tell themselves, the stories that they tell others, the music they consume, the people that they talk to, their brain goes, "Oh, you want to see more of this? I will show you more of this." So we literally begin to filter the information. As a CRNA, you would be able to connect with this like with a pain client, a chronic pain client, someone who was always optimistic, happy, outgoing. They have an injury, they develop chronic pain, and now all of a sudden they're catastrophizing. They're in victim
Mm.
mentality, and they were never that way before. And it's because they began to tell themselves a story that they couldn't do because.
Ooh.
So when we look at the life we want, we have to tell ourselves what we want. We almost have to be delusional about it. And I do affirmations every morning to retrain my brain to look at the world to be the person I want to become.
Wow. And so, in that sense, it's taking control and being co creator of your life rather than being reactive to it. And this is such a mental shift to make, and unfortunately it's not common, right? It's so easy to passively accept, the stories. You brought up stories a lot, and I really love that. It almost seems like what you're saying is we have a tendency to create our own echo chambers, in a sense. Once we start going down a certain rabbit hole, we look for confirmation to support that belief.
That's how the reticular activating system works.
Hmm.
It helps the subconscious mind filter information so what we see is confirming what we're telling ourselves.
Exactly.
The subconscious mind takes in 20 million or more bits of information per second. Just wrap your mind around that. A megabyte is 1,000 bytes, right? Am I getting
Wow.
that right? So 20 million bytes per second. We can't consciously handle that much information. So the subconscious mind, based on survive or thrive, the reticular activating system, it filters out what's important and it disregards the rest.
And
So
not to
that's our confirmation bias.
Right, and not to demonize the subconscious mind, because it does have some
No,
purpose, right? Like, if it's the source of habit, like, we can't relearn to tie our shoes every morning. It just wouldn't be, we couldn't survive. Like, we need to remember how to walk and make a cup of tea and all those things. And so there certainly is a place for it. It's just, I suppose, when there's negative programming that we're contending with, that it interferes with our lives.
well, here's the thing, it's not the enemy. We're in complete influence of it. We can change it. And the key is to use affirmations and self talk to talk about the things we do want. And just a tip for people, instead of saying something like, "I am no longer afraid of blank," you're going to say, "I am confident doing blank. I feel good when I." It's like going on stage to speak and someone's
Mhm.
nervous. Instead of saying, "I'm no longer afraid of going on stage," I would tell them to say, "I'm excited to go on stage. I look
So
forward
avoiding
to going on it."
Oh, I'm so sorry. So avoiding negation is an important component.
Yes.
Okay,
The brain does not hear negatives.
got it. So in essence, it would just hear a positive. If you say, I am no longer afraid, it's going to hear, I am afraid, in a way.
Exactly. It's like asking you to not think of a pink elephant. You can't not think of it without first thinking about it. Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. So, can you tell us, Penny, a little bit about the different types of hypnosis that can be used?
There are several different types. I want to start out by saying all hypnosis is self-hypnosis,
Mm,
because if you don't want to go in, or if you're not at some level of agreement, you're not going to go into a hypnotic state. That being said, we have spontaneous moments throughout the day where we go into that same state. We may be driving and space out. We may daydream when we fall asleep, when we wake up. Self hypnosis, one of the easiest ways, if you meditate
Mhm.
and you meditate looking at a candle or a spot on the wall or whatever, when you go into that same relaxed state, tell yourself a positive story or allow yourself to visualize, if you're a visual person,
Mhm.
the future that you desire and
Mhm.
feel the emotion behind it. It's important. Mentioned earlier about how emotion creates those important imprints. We want to feel that good emotion.
So that's different from the conscious mind, which we think we want to operate from words. It seems like the subconscious mind is especially suited for imagery. So, for instance, looking at a menu that has pictures versus just words would appeal more to the subconscious mind because there's color, there's something tangible. It evokes the sensation of yearning for tasting something on that menu. So, in a way, it sounds like it's connecting heart and mind to direct and make the intention even stronger.
Yes, and not everyone's visual. So if you're not visual, if I were to say to you, pretend or imagine you're on a beach, if you're not visual, you might connect with the feeling of the sand beneath your feet, the smell of the salty air, the
Mm,
sound of the waves. Bring in those senses to tap into that emotion. Now, there are hypnosis audios where you can listen to a guided experience. My experience with guided experiences is that they can be beautiful, they can be wonderful, but you might have to play around a little bit to find someone whose voice you resonate with. You might listen to an audio and they may use a metaphor or imagery that doesn't resonate with you.
mm,
Then just experiment and play something else. That doesn't mean hypnosis doesn't work, because I have an audio vault and I have several audios in there for confidence, because one may just not, it might not do it. It might
right.
not fit like a glove. So that's important rather than just dismissing it. Then there's guided hypnosis with a hypnotist, which is like the audio, but they do direct suggestion and imagery and stories and metaphors. That's really good at helping you just create new habits.
Mhm.
And it requires repetition. And you might find that if you have an emotion driven behavior, a deep belief driven behavior, it might get you 80 to 90% of the way there, but not all the way there. Now, that's not to say that it never does.
Mhm.
It absolutely can. It depends on our state of readiness and our desire for change. And I can speak to that in a little bit if you want to. Now, the work that I do, I help people do root cause work.
Okay.
And I do it in one of two ways. We either use a conversational technique where I literally have a conversation with someone. I believe that's what you and I did. And we
Yeah.
follow the breadcrumbs of those subconscious moments. Some people will call them Freudian slips. Like if we were having a conversation, we'd call it a Freudian slip. That's a subconscious moment. So we can have those when we're doing hypnosis. It can be a facial expression, an uncomfortable shift in the chair, and that means we're close to something and we follow it.
Wow.
Or we can do more directed, where I guide you into hypnosis, we connect with that feeling, and we follow it all the way back to its roots, which is what happened with the client with the blocks and
Mhm.
her mom.
And can we also talk for just a brief tangent about misperceptions around hypnosis? Because I would love to clarify for listeners. People a lot of times have these perceptions of like, I'm going to start barking like a dog. I'm going to do things I don't want to. Can you share with us like what things you can and not expect in hypnosis?
Oh, if you're working with a professional hypnotist, you're not that those things aren't going to happen.
Mhm.
When people participate in stage hypnosis, they're expecting a wild, crazy, fun time. And by volunteering, they're telling their mind, I believe this is safe. I want to do this. I want to have fun. So they're literally consenting to receive the suggestions. I have a whole story around that. I won't get into it here, but I've seen with my own eyes someone take themselves out of hypnosis in a stage show where the suggestion that was given went against what they felt was appropriate for them, and they took
Mm,
themselves out of hypnosis. A lot of people believe it's sleep. It's not sleep either. I've had clients that I go through my spiel, and when we're done, and I'm like, "What are your thoughts? What are your insights?" They're like, "Well, I wasn't asleep." And I'm like, "I weren't gonna be asleep." Like, because people will hold on to that. They believe that they're put out, they're put under. I've even had people ask me if I give them anesthesia medicine to do the hypnosis, and I was like, no. No, this is all a mind thing." So those are some of the most common misconceptions, is that it's sleep, you're put out, you're put under, you lose control, you don't know what's happening, and as you can attest, my clients talk to me even when I do formal trance, we're having conversation.
yes.
My clients aren't always relaxed
Yeah.
because we're doing the deep work. If you're listening to audios and you're getting the sense that you didn't get into hypnosis because you weren't physically relaxed, hypnosis and relaxation have nothing to do with one another. You might relax when you're in hypnosis, but hypnosis is a brainwave state, not a physical state.
So just to recap, it's about getting into that theta state, which may or may not feel relaxing, and repetition and imagery play a big role. And would you say it's repetition is the most important thing if you're going to shift your beliefs?
If you're using audios or you're doing classical hypnosis, repetition is key,
Mhm.
especially if what you're working to adapt is habits. When we have classically conditioned habits, repetition, repetition, repetition. And what you say to yourself, I mean, hypnosis feels like magic.
Mhm.
But one of the things that actually influences the long term outcomes is how people speak to themselves and treat themselves between sessions. That gives me a huge clue as to how long it's going to take to work with someone. If we have a lot of work to do to reframe that self-talk and to reframe those stories and to create a new habit of speaking nicely to ourselves and speaking of what we're capable of and what's possible for us, it takes a little bit longer. And it's not that we're doing anything wrong. It
Mhm.
is purely a habit. And you mentioned earlier about the ego. Our ego is not our enemy. I've seen this so many times. Our ego is not our enemy. It is a byproduct of our past experiences. And we get to dance with it and create something beautiful out of
God, I
it.
love that. Just that visual of dancing with the ego, not
Yes.
not seeing it as the threat, because ultimately it's just a part of us that's trying to optimize survival, correct?
Right. That's what it's here for. And in our modern world, in our modern life, seemingly innocuous things trigger it as being dangerous or fearful. And I apprentice with the shaman, and one of the things that gets reinforced is like we can't think of the ego as the enemy, because then we get into this internal struggle and it keeps us from our elevated self, from our higher self, from our consciousness. And when we can remove ourselves from thinking that we are our ego, it's just an expression of our 3D experience. If we can remove ourselves from thinking that we are defined by our ego, we can have enough of a separation that we can have emotional experiences and not get drawn down into them.
Hmm. So once again, love is always the answer, even when it comes to your own ego.
Yes.
I would love to hear about some of your successes with clients and what you are able to do, Penny. And then maybe on the backside of that, just so people can understand what are some limitations to hypnosis? What can you not change?
So, things that we can change. The list, if we decide that we want to change and there is a belief around it or a way that we're operating, The list is pretty limitless.
Amazing.
The desire to change has to be there. I have helped clients overcome vaginismus, chronic pain. I've helped clients who had severe reactions to anesthesia and meds go through surgery and have zero nausea, zero issues with their pain medicines. Wrote a letter to the CEO of the hospital saying it should be mandatory for all patients who have PONV. So she was pretty good about that. I have a client, Christy. Her video is over on YouTube. Her nurse reached out to me. She had idiopathic cerebellar ataxia.
Okay.
And they started doing stem cell treatments because the American medical system gave up on her. She was bedridden. And at the age of 19, they told her dad, make her comfortable.
Oh God.
So they started doing stem cell treatments in India. And let's see, it's in fall of 2022, she went from being in a wheelchair all the time to crawling across the floor to learning to walk heel toe. But she had an intense fear of falling, as you can imagine. For people who don't know, that's a balance disorder. And from the time she was 5 years old, she would fall, crash, and go boom all the time. So she had this repetitive reinforcement of a fear of falling. They reached out to me and we did 4 sessions together. But after just 2 sessions, her father heard her one day and he eased out of his office and she was in the hallway at the chair rail. She made 18 laps up and down the hallway with the chair rail. She had no idea he was watching. She was no longer depressed. Not what she would
Oh,
want to get out of bed, bathe, and dress herself. And after our 4th session, she stayed home alone for 3 days. She had close support nearby, but she wanted to stay alone while he went on a short vacation. And she functioned at her highest to the best of her ability and felt confident doing so. So now she's 28 and he's dealing with her going through that 13-year-old independent teenager phase because she never had
mm,
that opportunity. So that's an example of what working on confidence and motivation can do and overcoming fear. Fear is fear. It doesn't matter what the issue is. I've also helped clients who wanted to come off of 20 years of sleeping and anxiety meds. I had them consult with their doctor so that their doctor was working with them to properly wean them as we did the hypnosis. After 2 sessions, she felt she didn't need it anymore. But of course, I had to hold that line. You have to work with your doctor and wean. She did great. I've helped people heal from trauma, improve their relationships with their kids, going from this place where they were overwhelmed, exhausted, and tired because they were literally doing everything for everybody and leaving nothing for themselves at the end of the day. So then when their family wanted or needing things, that it was irritation, there was friction, short-tempered, and we helped her find that peace to let go of that people pleasing,
mm.
and the entire family dynamic has changed. Now, you mentioned what hypnosis can't help with, and I did do my homework, and you had asked a very specific question when you reached out, and I
Mhm.
do want to address that because I feel it's so important. When it comes to LGBTQIA, for people who aren't in the community, and I'm not in the community, I'm
Mhm.
just going to be straight up. You know, I've done a lot of work for myself. But before I had done a lot of work for myself, so I can speak for experience, we tend to want to see things as black and white.
Right.
And there is no black and white. And as healthcare providers, you and I both can attest to the fact that no two patients have the exact same hormone levels.
Mhm.
No two patients have the exact same gene sequence. The feedback mechanisms that control our hormone levels, even just among biological females,
Mhm.
there can be a whole range of levels of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. It impacts us in different ways. And genes modulate that. The way we respond to stress in our environments modulate that. Our exposure to our mother's hormones in the womb. And then there could be triple X, double XY. I believe there's an X double Y. These are things we can't see.
Right.
And they're also things that hypnosis cannot change or control. What hypnosis can do is help someone work through the pain of the attachment of wanting our families to see us differently, to move into acceptance of ourselves. It can even help family members who are having challenges to move into acceptance and let go of the fear of the stereotypes that might be going on. And a lot of the work that I do, regardless of the situation, whether it's LGBTQIA or something else, my ultimate goal, even though this isn't necessarily what the client's asking for, I know this is possible just through helping the client achieve what they want, is to help people move into a state of acceptance, that they're ultimately get to choose how they want to feel. And sometimes there's grief involved in that because we want our parents, our family, our friends, we want them to 100% love us and accept us for what we are. And sometimes when we come to the realization that they're just not in a place that that might be possible, there's grief
Yeah.
involved in that.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question? Though, I'm happy to go deeper if you want to go deeper.
I'm pretty sure you just nailed it, Penny, just off the bat. I mean, it was so comprehensive and beautiful. And just for transparency and full disclosure, yes, the reason I sought out Penny was to help me shift from the need for external validation from even some members of family to shifting and having the internal validation from myself. And as you said, that is a challenge, being LGBT in our society. And there's a lot of programming. And this is me reaching out in empathy. I realize there is a lot of programming, especially religious programming, that is foisted upon people in this country in order to promote a sort of hierarchy of who's at the top and who's at the bottom and who to demonize. And it's incredibly dangerous. And so, one of the gifts that I've received from being trans is to be aware of that, to open my eyes to that, to work through that and help other people work through that. And Penny helped me work through that. And so I can speak from experience that I highly recommend what she has to offer, because sometimes we're not even aware of how the things we might have heard as a 4-year-old impact us and stand in the way of us truly showing up and loving ourselves and loving one another. And yeah, you're right, Penny. There is sometimes grief and letting go and surrendering the expectations of others and just letting them be where they're at. So thank you for answering that so beautifully and comprehensively. That was really spot on.
Yeah, I really spent a lot of time contemplating that and just asking for the guidance to give the answer that would be most beneficial. And earlier I spoke about identity
Mm,
briefly. I don't know how often you speak about identity. Yeah, but I also spoke about attachments and religious indoctrination. And some people aren't going to like me using that word, but we're indoctrinated by our families. When we're given our name,
mm,
it begins, and maybe indoctrination is a harsh word, maybe it's conditioning.
mhm.
But when someone has their identity strongly tied into what they believe they must do and must not do in order to achieve a certain outcome, i.e., heaven or hell, people cling to that because that's what they've been told is the path. And to step back and allow people to have that space. And I think it's important to draw the line that acceptance does not mean tolerance. So
That's a
we
really
still get to have,
important distinction. Yeah, please
yes,
go
we
on.
still get to have boundaries and speak our truth. So we can accept that someone's not accepting of us, but we don't have to tolerate. We can have a boundary and say, I'm not available for that. If this continues, then maybe I don't spend as much time with you. And some people find that harsh, but we are responsible for our own mental health and our peace. No one else is going to do it for us because at the end of the day, deep inside of all of us, our own self preservation is what's paramount.
And as it is stated in the ancient book, the Kabbalion, the universe is mental. So when we can get on board and take responsibility for our own mental state and recognize how fiercely we need to protect that in order to operate from the highest place, that is transformational in so many ways.
I couldn't have said it better.
What are some takeaways that you can offer to our listeners, Penny, looking back on our conversation today?
Well, first and foremost, pay attention, become mindful of your self talk. Because when we get into the habit of going through our day and we're mindlessly going through our day, our thoughts are still running in the background.
Mhm.
So become aware of your self talk and begin to make a conscious effort to shift that. If you're using affirmations, tap into the power of the emotion of what you want. Emotion is an automatic bypass of the critical factor. So it's like being in hypnosis 2, 3 seconds, that emotion dives right in. And ultimately, it's a dance with your ego. We can let go of fighting with ourselves. We can embrace that we've had the experiences that we had and get curious and excited about what we can create
Oh, I
out of that.
love that. Curious and excited and mindfulness. Such a
Yes.
powerful awareness to come from. You have some incredible things coming up yourself in your business. Can you tell everyone about your hypnosis training you're offering soon?
Yes, I put hypnosis trainings back on the books this year. I took a pause last year. The next training is coming up in February. I believe by the time this airs, it it would be right on the wire to sign up because there's 30 hours of self-study.
Okay.
But I take you through a systematic process that can not only help shift beliefs, but get deep forgiveness, let go of any shame or guilt you didn't realize you were carrying subconsciously, and to just reprogram that mind and to keep the lessons, but leave the pain behind. There's
Mm.
also the ability to take that whole process and to do some of the more basic work. Like what I teach is a basic and advanced so that people have the process. You're not going out seeking another certification as soon as you're done. But I love supporting people. I have a Facebook group where once people graduate, people can come in and ask questions about client specific situations. I share my experience and expertise to help people to the greatest degree possible because the more of us there are out there helping people to break free from these past experiences and the weight and the emotions and the stories that keep us down, the more we elevate the consciousness of the planet. And at the end of the day, hypnosis, aside from meditation, hypnosis is one of the fastest ways to tap into that higher self and that intuition. It's about clearing the cobwebs of everything that's in the way. So that's coming up in February. I also have July and October coming up.
Wow. And the world needs transformation like this so much right now. We are going to put your information about all of this in the show notes today. And where else can people find you, Penny?
You can find me over on Instagram at penny.chason. On Facebook, just search Penny Chason. Most of my stuff I post to my personal wall, not a Facebook page. So just search for me over there. You'll find me.
Beautiful. I want to thank you once again, Penny, for being our guest today. Everybody, please check out Penny Chiasson, world class hypnotherapist, and stay conscious, everyone.
Thank you. Love the conversation.